Your silence is breaking the avoidant. They can't believe you never reached out. Beware of the assumption that anger is the ultimate sign of a broken bond. Society conditions us to believe that screaming, crying, and fighting are the hallmarks of a dying relationship. We are taught that as long as there is friction, there is still hope. But there is a far more terrifying force, a phenomenon that strikes the core of the avoidant psyche with surgical precision. It is not your rage. It is your absolute, uncompromising evaporation. They built their entire emotional ecosystem on the unspoken guarantee of your pursuit. They ran because they knew with absolute certainty that you would follow. Your anxious energy was the fuel that sustained their illusion of independence. They wore your desperation like a crown, a silent validation that they were wanted yet untouchable. But then the unthinkable happens. You stop. You do not send the closure text. You do not wait by the digital windows of their life. You simply cease to exist in their reality. This is the paradox of the avoidant mind. They spent months, perhaps years, pushing you away, craving the open space, demanding the oxygen they claimed you were consuming. Yet the moment you finally grant them that vast, empty expanse, the silence becomes deafening. They wait for the familiar echo of your footsteps. They brace for the inevitable message. Days turn into weeks, weeks bleed into months, and the realization begins to creep in like cold water seeping under a locked door. You are not playing a game. You are not waiting for them to notice your absence. You have actually truly walked away. Your silence is no longer a pause in the conversation. It has become a permanent baseline. And for the first time in their carefully orchestrated life of distance, they are standing completely alone, choking on the very freedom they fought so hard to obtain. They cannot believe you never reached out. To understand why your sudden absence is systematically dismantling them, we must first dissect the architecture of the avoidant mind. Its atom is a structure built entirely on a foundation of paradox in the realm of depth psychology. Carl Jung spoke of the persona, the mask one wears to navigate the social world, and the shadow, the hidden, unacknowledged fragments of the unconscious self. For the deeply avoidant individual, their persona is one of absolute impenetrable self-sufficiency. They project an image of stoic independence, an island unto themselves, needing no one, relying on nothing. But this is a carefully constructed illusion, a fragile fortress. From a neurobiological standpoint, their nervous system is wired for perceived threat. Intimacy is not a sanctuary. It is a cage. When you step too close, their amygdala fired, signaling danger, urging them to retreat. They convinced themselves that your warmth was suffocating, that your desire for connection was a demand they simply could not meet. Yet here lies the devastating truth hidden deep within their shadow. Their so-called independence was never self-generated. It was entirely subsidized by you. Think of emotional dynamics as an economy of energy. You were the anxious pursuer. You poured your vitality, your time, and your relentless focus into the chasm between you. Your anxiety, your constant frantic attempts to bridge the gap, provided the exact energetic counterweight they needed to remain comfortably distant. They did not have to face their own inner emptiness because your chaotic presence filled the room. They did not have to question their fundamental worth because your relentless pursuit constantly affirmed it. Jung noted that we often project our unintegrated shadow onto others. The avoidant projected their own denied, terrifying need for connection onto your anxious attachment. As long as you were doing the emotional heavy lifting, as long as you were the one reaching, grasping, and begging, they could safely play the role of the overwhelmed, detached observer. They outsourced their emotional labor to you. Your desperation was the mirror in which they admired their own autonomy. They fed on your anxiety. It was a dark, unspoken currency. Every unanswered text you sent, every tear you shed, every boundary you compromised to accommodate their distance. It was all nourishment for their ego. It proved they held the power. It proved they were untouchable. But what happens when the power source is abruptly unplugged? When you finally embrace the silence, you withdraw your energetic investment. The counterweight vanishes. Suddenly, the avoidant is left suspended in a quiet expanse of their own making. There is no anxious pursuit to push against. There is no chaotic energy to distract them from the agonizing hum of their own suppressed trauma. The structural integrity of their persona begins to fracture. They are forced brutally and without warning to encounter their own shadow. The profound, terrifying realization that their independence was merely a reaction to your pursuit. Without you chasing them, they are not running toward freedom. They are simply running alone, and the absolute stillness you left behind is forcing them to look at the very demons they used to escape. But before this profound quiet, there was the noise, the agonizing, relentless noise of your own depletion. To comprehend the sheer magnitude of your withdrawal, we must first revisit the battlefield you left behind. For months, perhaps years, you existed in a state of chronic, suffocating, energetic debt. You were trapped in a subtle, insidious trauma response known as fawning. You abandoned your own core, dismantling your boundaries piece by piece, simply to construct a safe harbor for a ghost. You can learn to read the microscopic shifts in their atmosphere, a slight delay in a response, a sudden cooling of their tone, a momentary aversion of their gaze. These infinitesimal changes sent your nervous system into an absolute panic. You shrunk your presence, folding your very human needs into tiny, invisible compartments, just to fit comfortably into the margins of their heavily guarded life. You operated under a tragic illusion. You believed that if you were just patient enough, if you were understanding enough, if you could just love them flawlessly, they would finally thaw. They would finally stay. This was your grand unspoken sacrifice. You willingly traded your own vitality for mere crumbs of their attention. When they pulled away into their fortress, you instinctively stepped forward into the cold. You absorbed their distance and somehow translated it into your own inadequacy. You bled yourself dry. You were endlessly pouring your light into a vessel that was fundamentally fractured at its base. Every single time you reached out, after they went silent, you took on a heavy toxic burden. You alone paid the energetic toll required to keep the illusion alive. You were the one lying awake in the dead of night, your chest impossibly tight, staring at a glowing screen, carefully crafting paragraphs of vulnerability that were ultimately met with indifferent single-syllable replies, or worse, with an echoing emptiness. In the lexicon of depth psychology, you were entirely consumed by a repetition compulsion. You were unconsciously attempting to heal an ancient, unhealed wound by extracting validation from a severely unavailable source. You handed them the absolute power of a deity, allowing them to act as a silent judge who dictated your self-worth based entirely on their fluctuating proximity. But emotional energy is a finite currency. The human psyche can only sustain a one-sided orbit for so long before gravity completely fails. The fawning, the endless accommodating, the desperate agonizing attempts to play the role of the low-maintenance partner who required absolutely nothing. It slowly hollowed you out from the inside. You began to lose the distinct shape of your own identity. You became little more than a frantic reaction to their calculated avoidance. You were a satellite permanently trapped in the freezing gravitational pole of a dead planet. You were utterly bankrupt, emotionally, spiritually, somatically. You had taken out massive, unforgivable loans against your own soul, all to finance a connection that only truly existed within the confines of your own hope. They witnessed your exhaustion. They felt the heavy weight of your unspoken pleas. But instead of offering grace or a hand to hold, they simply retreated further into the mist. They viewed your depletion not as a shared tragedy, but as a twisted confirmation of their own superiority. Your perceived weakness validated their false strength. They never expected the well to actually dry up. They operated on the arrogant assumption that your reserves of forgiveness and pursuit were entirely infinite. They thought you would always be there waiting in the shadows, hoping against hope, willingly enduring the pain. They did not realize that a breaking point is not always a fiery explosion. Sometimes it is a quiet, devastating realization. The exact moment you recognize that the energetic debt will never be repaid. The moment you simply close the ledger and then the ledger closes. There is no grand announcement, no dramatic final confrontation, no tearful farewell letter left in the digital ether, just a quiet, terrifying snap of the invisible cord that bound you to their ghost. You wake up one morning and the frantic compulsion to monitor their existence is simply gone. The desperate burning need to be understood by someone entirely committed to misunderstanding you has evaporated. This is not a strategic game of no contact designed to manipulate them into missing you. This is an exorcism. In the deep waters of Jungian psychology, you have initiated the most crucial, brutal phase of your spiritual survival. You have begun the process of shadow integration. For so long, your conscious identity, your persona, was the ultimate tragic healer. You played the role of the endlessly forgiving, unconditionally loving martyr. You systematically banished your healthy anger, your rigid boundaries, and your raw self-respect into the dark, neglected basement of your unconscious mind. You believed that if you were just good enough, if you suppressed your own teeth and claws, they would finally feel safe enough to stay. But a starving organism cannot survive on hope alone. Your nervous system, pushed to the absolute brink of energetic annihilation, finally intervened. It unlocked the basement door. Your shadow stepped forward. This integrated shadow does not bring chaotic screaming rage. It brings cold, calculating, and unapologetic self-preservation. It is the primitive, highly intelligent part of you that looks at the entirely unbalanced equation of this relationship and simply says no more. It is the ruthless guardian of your sovereign energy. To the outside observer, and certainly to the avoidant, this sudden withdrawal appears shocking. They will inevitably label your new impenetrable boundary as cold. They will try to frame your absolute silence as a vindictive punishment, a weaponized form of abandonment. But they are deeply mistaken. Your silence is not a weapon forged to strike them down. It is a titanium shield forged to keep you alive. You did not walk away to teach them a lesson about your worth. You walked away because the structure was collapsing, and they stood by calmly watching you desperately try to hold up the ceiling alone. You simply stopped breathing in the suffocating dust of their ambivalence. This is the exact turning point that the avoidant psyche is entirely unprepared to process. They are highly trained to navigate your emotional explosions. They know exactly what to do with your tears. They use them as tangible proof of your instability, a convenient contrast to their own artificial calmness. They know perfectly well how to handle your long pleading messages as they absorb the ego validation and leave you on read. But they have absolutely no psychological defense mechanism for your sudden clinical indifference. They cannot compute a version of you that simply drops the rope. You have mutated from a highly predictable, easily manipulated source of emotional supply into an unreadable, untouchable entity. You withdrew the one thing they secretly relied upon to regulate their own fragmented self-esteem, your unwavering fixation on them. By integrating your shadow, you reclaimed your scattered energy and pulled it firmly back into your own core. You are no longer the anxious, bleeding chaser. You have become the silent architect of your own peace, and in doing so, you have left them standing at the edge of the chasm they stubbornly dug between you. They are waiting for you to build the bridge, but you have already burned the blueprints. At first, your absence feels exactly like the relief they always claim to desire. When the invisible cord snaps, the avoidant takes a deep, triumphant breath. They believe. They have successfully reclaimed their precious autonomy. The heavy pressure of your expectations is finally lifted. They are free. But this freedom is a poison chalice. As the days multiply into weeks, and the weeks stretch into a barren, quiet expanse, the initial relief begins to curdle into a profound psychological vertigo. They wait for the inevitable collapse of your willpower. They expect the late-night text, the emotional outburst, the undeniable proof that you are still hopelessly tethered to their memory. But the horizon remains completely, terrifyingly blank. This is the dawn of their internal implosion. You have not just broken a behavioral pattern. You have violated the fundamental laws of their emotional physics. The script they memorize, the one where they run and you frantically chase, has been burned to ash. By stepping off the stage entirely, you have plunged them into a disorienting darkness without your anxious energy to push against their carefully constructed persona begins to disintegrate. They secretly relied on your chaotic pursuit to drown out the agonizing hum of their own unhealed wounds. Now wrapped in your uncompromising silence, they are forced to listen to the very demons they spent a lifetime outrunning. A strange phenomenon begins to take root in their psyche: phantom guilt. It is not necessarily a genuine remorse for the profound pain they caused you. Rather, it is a creeping cold dread, a visceral panic that they have made a catastrophic, irreversible miscalculation. They arrogant assumed your love was a bottomless well. They assumed your patience was a natural resource they could mine indefinitely. The sudden, absolute drought leaves them gasping. Their entire illusion of control crumbles. For so long they believed they were the undeniable masters of the dynamic. They controlled the thermostat of intimacy, cooling it down whenever our warmth became too threatening. But your complete evaporation reveals a brutally humiliating truth. Their perceived power was never real. It was entirely contingent on your willing participation. By simply walking away, you have systematically stripped them of their emotional supply. Desperation breeds highly predictable tactics. You may notice them attempting to cast a line into the dark water, a subtle calculated breadcrumb, a random message about something entirely trivial, a strategic lingering view on your digital life. They are not reaching out for genuine connection. They are running a diagnostic test on your boundaries. They are desperately trying to spark the dead machinery of your anxiety. They secretly want you to be angry. They want you to demand answers because your rage, your grief, your visible devastation would reassure them that they still matter. Your pain is the only mirror in which they can still see a reflection of their own worth. But you do not bite. You do not respond. The bait falls silently into a bottomless abyss. And this is the exact moment the avoidant mind truly breaks. The terrifying, undeniable reality finally solidifies in their consciousness. You are not playing a strategic game of no contact. You are not hiding in the wings, waiting for a grand cinematic apology. You are simply gone. The impenetrable fortress they spent years building to keep you at a safe distance has suddenly locked from the outside, and for the first time in their lives, they realize they are trapped inside with nothing but the echo of their own choices. While they are suffocating in the quiet expanse of their own creation, you have crossed an invisible sacred threshold. You have entered the sovereign state. For months or even years, you confused isolation with loneliness. Loneliness is an energetic bleeding, a desperate clawing hunger for a phantom who refuses to haunt you properly. It is the agonizing, pathetic state of leaving your front door wide open to the freezing wind, endlessly, waiting for a traveler who deliberately changed their route to avoid you. But what you are experiencing in this new chapter is profoundly different. It is an act of high-frequency alchemy. It is true, unadulterated solitude. Solitude is not a penalty inflicted upon you. It is a psychological empire. It is the conscious, deliberate closing of that heavy door. It is the audible click of the lock in the deep framework of Jungian individuation. You have successfully completed the withdrawal of your projections. You no longer gaze at their distant, unavailable shell and hallucinate a potential savior. You no longer require their sporadic, calculated breadcrumbs of affection to validate your fundamental right to exist. You have violently reclaimed the throne of your own psyche. Your silence is no longer a strategic protest. It is not a temporary, desperate tactic designed to manipulate a reaction out of a fundamentally broken system. Your silence has simply become your natural atmosphere. A quiet, terrifyingly beautiful fortress. They actively search for the anxious, trembling version of you, the one whose entire nervous system would instantly fracture at their slightest retreat. But that fragile iteration of you is dead. It was incinerated in the relentless, purifying fires of your own exhaustion. From those ashes, a remarkably different architecture has emerged. You have mutated into an absolute, untouchable frequency, Consider the sheer unapologetic power of a celestial singularity. It does not chase the stars around it. It does not plead for proximity. It simply rests in its own immense, undeniable density. Anything that approaches it without the correct energetic velocity is fundamentally repelled. You have become exactly that, an immovable center of gravity. You are no longer a frantic satellite reacting to their avoidance. You are simply resting in your own sovereign mass. When they finally attempt to peer over the towering walls of your absence, they do not see a weeping, devastated victim. They see a completely self-sustaining entity, a quiet kingdom that functions with flawless precision, completely unaffected by their unpredictable, chaotic weather. They realize with a bone-chilling finality that you did not merely walk away from them. You walked back to yourself. The parasitic tether, that heavy, toxic psychological chain that kept your mood entirely bound to their fluctuating distance, has permanently dissolved. You no longer feel the phantom tug of their avoidance, their internal panic, their growing confusion, their subtle, desperate attempts to test the structural integrity of your boundaries. None of it registers on your radar anymore. You have mastered the most lethal, most beautiful form of psychological self-preservation. You gave them exactly what they always arrogantly claimed they wanted. You gifted them the absolute unending quiet of your permanent absence. And in that breathtaking stillness, you are untouchable. This is the ultimate brutal truth of your evaporation. The silent goodbye is not a weapon of destruction. It is the profound, intricate architecture of your own rebirth. For so long, you genuinely believed that losing them would mean losing a vital, irreplaceable piece of your own soul. You were terrified of the vast, empty space they would leave behind. You clung to the familiar pain because it was the only connection you had left. But as the dust finally settles, as heavy, parasitic skin that was suffocating your true nature, the anxious, fawning version of you, the one who desperately begged for microscopic scraps at the table of an emotionally starved ghost, had to die. It was a necessary, excruciating sacrifice on the dark altar of your own individuation. By boldly stepping out of the agonizing cycle, by firmly refusing to participate in their endless, exhausting game of pursuit and retreat, you deliberately starved the false self. And from that deliberate, painful starvation, your authentic ego has violently resurrected. Let the avoidants sit in the deafening cold quiet of their own making. Let them wrestle with the phantom guilt, the creeping, inescapable realization that they once held a rare, unconditional fire in their hands and arrogantly blew it out. Their journey into the dark corners of their own unintegrated shadow is no longer your heavy burden to carry. You have officially, permanently resigned from the unpaid, thankless role of their emotional savior. You are no longer a frantic reaction to their absence. You are the immovable mountain. You have successfully reclaimed your vital, radiant energy, pulling it back from the barren wasteland of their false potential and planting it firmly into the deeply fertile soil of your own reality. The absolute silence you offer them now is not a vindictive punishment. It is simply a necessary boundary, a titanium wall that fiercely protects the sacred sovereign ground you have fought so incredibly hard to reclaim. If you recognize yourself in this silence, you are not lost. You are returning. Share your story in the comments if you are ready to walk away from the false self. Welcome to the silent goodbye.